And let me pull to my questions. Called on me quickly. Despite the overwhelming scientific consensus that climate change is happening and that humans are the primary driver, this administration is using government resources to promote fringe science. Mr. Prochaska, President Trump is reportedly forming a panel to question whether the burning of fossil fuels is harming the planet. Allegedly chairing this panel is Professor William Happer, a distinguished physics professor with no formal training as a climate scientist who once argued the dubious proposition that we need to spew more carbon dioxide into our environment, not less. Professor Harper has also argued that the demonization of carbon dioxide is similar to the demonization of Jews in Germany by Hitler. What are the national security dangers that the White House is risking by challenging the relationship between carbon dioxide and global warming?
I might defer to other members of the panel. My organization focuses almost primarily on the impacts of oil and gas dependency on economic and national security threats, so we don't really focus as much on climate issues.
I'm happy to take it.
Yes, ma'am.
So not only are the military facilities at risk, because obviously the Navy has to be at sea level, and so their ports are at risk, but their operations are also affected. The freshening of the water from the melting of the huge ice sheets and glaciers actually affects our sonar, and so our military readiness. It actually affects the engagements that our troops are being brought into all over the world in more and more contentious conflicts over limited resources impacted by the lack of food or water that are driven by some of the climate extremes that we're seeing. And not only that, but in our own country, as we've seen in communities like my hometown of New Orleans, our military gets deployed to try to help out in the times of a national emergency, and we're seeing more and more of those disasters declared on a regular basis every year with, mega storms hitting Puerto Rico and North Carolina and on and on. So they are stretched thin, they're under-resourced, and climate change is going to make all of these things much more challenging.
Thank you. Anyone else want to opine on how this panel that Professor Happer will chair may impede our ability to secure our nation? Yes.
One of the biggest concerns I would have is just that it could help to promote the muzzling of the defense community, which, as we've just heard, is highly aware of all of these concerns. And so one of the biggest issues would be censoring the intelligent foresight that the defense community is already engaged in. And I would just point out that this is a wonderful example of the Merchants of Doubt strategy that has been written about so eloquently by Naomi Oreskes, and I really encourage people to read that book. It turns out it's been the same group of sort of very old Cold War physicists who first advocated that smoking didn't cause cancer and now argue that greenhouse gases don't warm the planet.
It's a kind of an unscientific situation led by so-called scientists.
They're typically being paid something.
Yeah, by the interest that they are promoting, no doubt, the coal and fossil fuel industries. Correct?
I don't know for sure. The George Marshall Institute has been a major player in supporting these Cold War physicists, and I don't know for sure where they get all their funding, but it would be very likely that it's fossil fuel-oriented funding.
Thank you. Perhaps Congress may do well to create some legislation that would require these so-called independent studies by scientists to disclose who's actually funding their work. A few days ago, Vice President Mike Pence promised members of the National Association of Governors that Congress would pass a historic infrastructure bill next year, and of course, that would require bipartisan support. Do you believe that the administration's unpopular infrastructure proposal with this panel will muzzle governors in terms of their interactions with the federal government henceforth on infrastructure?
Probably not California.
And that's a good thing.
You could respond, the
Thank you.
rest could respond in writing, please. We appreciate it.
I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. We now